Hey, welcome to You'll Probably Agree. As always, we have Jeff York from the Establishing Shot on. And today, well, 2026 already has been a wonderful year in killing off basically everyone from the start. But Robert Duvall hit the hardest because he has had an incredible filmography, maybe because of right place, right time, but also, I mean, working with Coppola, briefly Lucas, oh yeah, Joel Schumacher and Falling Down. Joel Schumacher, and of course, he worked with, he did The Road, Network with Sidney Lumet, a man with an illustrious career. But of course, like the funniest thing is that his first role, like first major feature role, he doesn't say a word in it, which is pretty interesting. But before we get into that, Jeff, thank you so much for coming on. And
My
should
pleasure.
we start with the? I have a little clip here, and if there's a lesson in film acting when it comes to Duvall, I think it comes from a little bit of how you react instead of act. And here's a little bit of silent
Sure,
acting
certainly.
from Duvall as Boo Radley in To Kill a Mockingbird. And am I spoiling it? I don't know. They made me read it. I read it in grade school and then saw the movie. So not really.
Hopefully people read it in high school and they're watching your show because they're mature, seasoned people of at least 24.
Yeah, yeah, hopefully. But there's young people who like film history too. So
Yeah,
let's
true.
take a look.
Then I saw someone carrying Jim.
Well, who was it?
Oh, there he is, Mr. Tate. He didn't tell you his name. Hey, Boo.
Now, that's a charming
Good to
scene
hear.
because yeah. Yeah, that's a charming scene because throughout that story, you think that Boo Radley, they call him Boo, although his real name is Arthur,
Right.
because he's the next door neighbor that supposedly stabbed his father in the
Right.
leg with a scissor clipping while he was clipping out the newspaper. And it turns out he's not like that at all, which is the whole point. As a matter of fact, he saves the children, which is the whole point of the movie about not getting people, not making judgments
Not
about
judging a
people
book by its
without
cover.
knowing them.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, which
Yeah,
is
he's a little touched as Boo Radley, kind of the town oddball. Now, today they might call that person on the spectrum or maybe, some sort of slow learning or whatever you want to call it. It doesn't matter. At the time, those kind of people were often feared or shunned in those days, and then they were kind of the odd men out. But, he's a sweet character in it, and, he knows right from wrong. And that's what he did at the end in saving
Mm.
the little girl and her brother because they were being targeted after their father defended a black man in court in the South,
Mm.
and that wasn't done much in those days, and that was pretty radical, um, and yet it's such a sweet, touching thing, and he's afraid of people, and yet it kind of rises to the occasion. But you're right about Duvall making that role so memorable, and he doesn't say anything there, but he wants to, and you can see him connecting with that little girl, and she's looking at him as an adult, as a person, and somebody to be respected, and she even says hi, Boo, talks to him, and like
Mm.
she's maybe communicated with him before, maybe not in words per se, but in just whatever, and it's the music there too by Elmer Bernstein is incredible.
I
uh
know. When it
that
hits
was
those
great.
high strings,
Yeah.
oh, yeah,
Na, 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 na. Oh my god, just breaks
yeah.
your heart. But it's such a great movie and such a great sort of big starting performance for him. I mean, he had done television before that and was memorable in a number of good things, including a famous Twilight Zone episode. But
Mm.
I think that film sort of almost became a good example of how, no matter the size of the role,
Mm.
he was always really good, very authentic, very memorable. He didn't ever really seem to act. I mean, even when he was big or showing a lot of emotion, it seemed so real and so honest. And there he's playing a very much a character on the margins, and yet, he seems painfully real. And it just, I think that was maybe a way of describing Duvall's character in both sets, that he was good in a bigger role or a small role. He was good in supporting parts as well as leads, and he was just so authentic. He just made everything seem like you're watching a real person, a real character, not an actor playing somebody who was temperamental or mentally challenged or high and mighty or whatever else. And he did that all the way through the end of his career, and had a 50-year career as it was anyway. So more than
Yeah.
that, I mean, decades was he at it. I mean, that was 62, I think.
A
And
Mockingbird? Yeah, it could have been. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
he acted up until just a couple of years ago. So he was at
Yeah.
it a long, long time.
Yeah, he really was because Duvall died at 95 years old,
Right.
and in To Kill a Mockingbird, I think he was 31 in that film.
Hmm.
And before that, he was in a series of television shows and stage plays, and
Right.
I think he lived with Gene Hackman at one point. They were
And
like
Dustin
roommates.
Hoffman. At one point,
Yeah, and
those three
Dustin
guys were
Hoffman.
struggling actors in New York and living together in a pretty average, I'm sure, typical actor's apartment in those days. But yeah, he did. He made a lot of friends and worked with a lot of those people throughout his career and knew them well. And it's funny, this last week when he died, nobody had a bad word to say about him. I mean, he was truly an actor's actor, and
Mhm.
was a great talent, and apparently one of the nicest people in Hollywood. Though he was opinionated, he could be
Mhm.
certainly he didn't like Stanley Kubrick, and the idea of doing multiple takes and all that kind of stuff. He felt that was disrespectful to the artist and the actor. But by and large, he worked with young filmmakers, all kinds of people, and took on many roles. And I think he enjoyed working. I think he was, from that era where, hard work was kind of its own life goal in a way. And he just happened to be in a profession that paid well and had a certain amount of autonomy or fame. But yeah, he worked a lot, and just what a resume.
Yeah, and the most beautiful thing that he would do is he was a great listener as an actor.
Yes. Yes.
Just in the clip we saw there, there's a lot of pain in that character,
Yeah.
but he doesn't play Boo Radley as sort of like this overly special character because, yeah, he was maybe special needs then. I mean, I had the theory because they never really, like, tell you what really happened to him. I had the theory that probably his father was beating him,
I'm
and,
sure.
and that's why he stabbed him, but you
Yep.
don't hear that end of the story. But when you
And
see
people didn't talk about it in those days, which is fascinating too, because those people were often left a mystery because you don't know what went on there. It just wasn't talked about in polite society.
Yeah, they didn't talk about it much, and he also like when you look at him, and she like Walter Murch once said that editing is a dancing of the eyes, and when you see how Boo is looking at Scout, the way they look at each other, it's like two kids, because Boo was the
Hmm.
guy who
Right.
never really got to grow up. He was never
Hmm.
probably given this right sort of mental health care to uh function in society the way he would, and not that he's like mentally unwell, but that he might be a little slow or
Hmm.
something like
Right.
that, and
Right.
there was no way for him to and To Kill a Mockingbird touches upon so many roles, and every time when people say, oh, I saw an actor first in this and I saw him first in that, well, in this movie he doesn't have a single line of dialogue, yet his performance is just so sweet and tender. And yes, that is thanks to the score a little bit, and a little bit thanks to the blocking of the scene where he's behind the door and the shadow comes out from him and he's kind of emerging into the light. But for a debut where you don't say anything and people still remember, like, oh yeah, that was Robert Duvall, that's something really special. And he kind of carried that further into his career. And I mean, one of the biggest roles that he did, or the biggest role, was in The Godfather, as the
Yeah. I
family.
mean, I think if you go back and you look at Duvall's career, and certainly people are doing that now because of his passing, and their reflection on his work. He very often was not given the biggest or the grandest role, but he
Mhm.
always made it very, very memorable. In fact, I think he made many roles much more memorable than a lot of times the leads, or more crucial to it. And it's funny you mentioned The Godfather, because I think in many respects it was kind of I don't want to say the high watermark in his career. He had many, many high watermarks, but
Mhm.
I think it was the high watermark in his early career, because that's
Mhm.
such a crucial role and he's in it a lot. And yet he does not dominate ever like Al Pacino or Marlon Brando or Robert Duvall, or generally or James Caan is. He's usually sitting there quiet, studiously listening,
Mhm.
even when he's kidnapped momentarily. to be told that the Don is dead and you're going to make the deal with Sonny and all that. And, he has to sit there and react to it. To your point, his actions are very much reactions, most of these kind of films. And he's superb at it. I mean, just in that scene alone in The Godfather, when he's kidnapped, he has to process that his father is dead. This now changes the power shift. He has to examine what, not even knowing all the details about everything, and then try to figure out what to do as not only a grieving son, or as it were an adoptive son, but nonetheless, let alone as the consigliere. He's still got to think as his job to protect the family and to protect their interests and stuff like that. So he's got to be processing all of that, and you see all of that in that scene. Like I said, he doesn't have a lot of dialogue there, but Duvall conveys all that and the shifting, very subtle emotions across his face. I just want to share one other one that I think is very key in that too, Mike, and it's kind of the opposite, because it's kind of a funny scene, even though it's a tremendously fraught scene, and that is when he's sent out to L.A. to talk to John Marley's producer about reconsidering Johnny Fontaine, and it's very courteous, and he's giving him the producer's giving Tom Hagen a tour of his grounds and his stables and his beautiful luxurious mansion, treating him to a very special dinner, and then right at the end of it, he gets up and starts being very bellicose about about why he doesn't want to give Johnny Fontaine that role, because he stole this ingenue from him, and he was not only grooming her to be the next star, but he was also, of course, sleeping with her, and he says derogatory things about her. But as he's saying this, and he's working up a full head of steam to the point where he practically spits out the words, "And I can't afford to look ridiculous." Tom Hagen is sitting there. Robert Duvall is sitting there as Tom Hagen, and he's taking more and more bigger mouthfuls of food. Like he knows that he's on the verge of getting tossed out. But this is an incredible meal he's just been offered, whatever it is. Yeah. And he's going to eat it as much as he can. And then, it's like before he's going to get shot or hurt himself, or I was like, "Thank you very much for the meal. If you wouldn't mind, if you could drive me back to the airport. The Don likes to hear bad news as soon as he gets it." And it's hilarious because he's just sitting there listening and taking it, but he's gulping this food down. And I just love that they find the humor in that. The other thing that's very funny about that too, and this is about the weight and gravitas, I think, of Duvall as a character, when he plays a character and what he brings to the party, is right after that, you have John Marley wake up, of course, with the horse's head in his bed, and he screams, "Ah, ah, ah," and it slowly dissolves to a shot of Marlon Brando, the Godfather, and it's a big laugh in the movie because he's like this. So that works, it is, And the funny thing about it is, I'm sure that wasn't the Godfather, Vito's idea to do that to the horse. I'm sure that was Tom Hagen's, because Tom Hagen got the tour of the thing and learned how important that horse was, And so that's the Tom Hagen who can be kind and calm and easygoing, and talking to Michael in Godfather 2 about at the very end, that flashback scene, like, "Your father and I have talked about your career many times, and he's got great plans for you." But he can also be the guy who's like probably on the way to the airport. He calls in the muscle and says, "Go in there tonight in that stable, cut off that horse's head and throw it in his bed." I doubt that was Vito Corleone's idea. Vito's a little nicer than that, but maybe Tom Hagen isn't. He was a street rough. He was friends with Sonny, who picked him off the streets, moved in with them. They kind of adopted him. He went to law school, became this intelligent person. But that shows you the tough, really bastard that he can be, and chooses not to. And most of the time, as he's playing the business-suited lawyer, but it just that's capable of seeing that, because Duvall can bring the elegance to it, the quiet to it, but also this incredible machismo and toughness and even viciousness if needed.
Yeah, the thing, and very well put. The thing I really liked, about his performance in those movies is that he can be very sensitive, but he was also kind of astute, and he didn't play like one side. And the most memorable clip I can think of from the movie is when he delivers the news to Don Corleone that his son is dead.
I was about to come up and wake you just now and tell you. But you needed a drink first. They shot Sonny on the causeway. He's dead.
The way he says it, he cares about this
Yeah,
person.
and it
He's
gets to him. He's
just
still
a
a
client.
person, even though he can be vicious. He's still that's his brother, his best friend. The head of the family. While Vito was convalescing, and he's not crying, but he's got tears in his eyes, and he's struggling to tell the old man that. It's a great
Yeah.
moment. And Duvall got a supporting actor nomination. Of all the people nominated in that category, I think if I was voting, I would have voted for him because Al Pacino, who's in that category, was in the wrong category. He's got the lead role in that, but they do this all the time with the Academy where they put the wrong people in the wrong categories to see if they can win or whatever else. And they knew that Marlon Brando with this big comeback role, and he kind of his weight and presence hangs over the movie greater. So you could argue that it is maybe a co-lead in a way. But Duvall was so good, and what he did with that scene, he doesn't have the showy role like James Caan, who was nominated, Eddie Albert, who was the bellicose father-in-law finding out about his daughter marrying Charles Grodin, the con artist in The Heartbreak Kid, or Joel Grey, who was really doing a star turn with all those wonderful numbers that he got to do as the MC in Cabaret. But it's quietly devastating. It's strong. It's so memorable. And he's in it a lot. And he has to run a range of emotions like you just showed there. And he's perfect, absolutely spot on every scene, I think. And you think, supporting actor, best supporting actor, that is supporting the other major characters in the storyline. And he's great in it. In fact, shortly thereafter, I believe it was that Coppola said, Robert Duvall was Hollywood's number one, number two lead. Now, granted, he wasn't necessarily the number two lead in that movie, but the point sticks that he's always, you want him in a supporting role. Like his turn as Colonel Kilgore in Apocalypse Now is maybe 10 minutes of screen time. And yet we remember him as seeming much more in the movie because he just is so memorable and sort of hangs there so large. And he did that a lot in movies. When he did the supporting roles, he took them. They're good movies, they're good stories, they were good roles. And I think, if anything, he made them even more impactful because he was so good in them.
Yeah, and the funny thing is with Colonel Kilgore is that he was the exact opposite character of Tom Hagen, because Tom Hagen was calm and collected and professional, and Kilgore, like, it literally just wants to kill. Like, he gets off from war. He loves the smell of napalm. He likes the idea of burning flesh. Like, he's kind of a nut, but he doesn't totally play him like a nut. He kind of plays him like this likable yet screwed up kind of guy, like when he's hanging around the guy with the surfboard and he's telling
there's a
him
league, almost a avuncular quality to him with like,
man,
we're going to surf here. And, he's kind of, almost like a buddy in a way.
Yeah, he's like your buddy. He's like, he has this platoon, they're killing guys, but he still wants to have fun, but I mean, it all comes at the expense of, if there's civilians in the way, he's going to let that guy surf no matter what. But, it was interesting to see Coppola take Duvall and put him in a totally different role. And yet it didn't feel like he was forcing that role because he was in the military. Although he didn't do very much in the military, like he barely.
But his dad was from the military, which informed a number of performances, even probably the very bellicose Great Santini that he played, which is probably, in many respects, probably his most complex or certainly unlikable character in a way. The basketball game scene where he just won't let it go, and then he insults the daughter, he insults the wife, he insults the son, and and he still won't let it go because it's raining out and he's still practicing basketball. Like he's just not gonna let it go, and he's hating himself for losing, and he's preparing for the next time that he'll beat him next time, whatever. But one of the things I love about Duvall too is I don't know of any other actor, maybe Gene Wilder, who could go to the extremes both so well. And Robert Duvall, maybe Gene Hackman a little bit too. But I mean, Robert Duvall was often very soft-spoken in his work. Like he won the Oscar for Tender Mercies. And even though there's, some flashbacks and we realize that he wasn't the nicest country music star when he was, in his heyday as a big star and drinking and womanizing and stuff like that. Now he's a very quiet character and it's a very sweet role. But, he's often very, big and bellowing, or, he's very good being quiet and whispering. And, in some respects, both most of the roles that he played probably called for a little bit of both in some respects. But then you get in something like Network, and he's
Hmm.
funny, being funny big and being funny kind of quiet. Like there's the famous scene where they realize they have a hit on their hands with Howard Beale going crazy on camera. The Network
Hmm.
and William Holden's head of the news division, Max Schumacher, who's also Howard Beale's best friend, wants to take him off the air because he thinks he's going crazy and he needs to be, seeing a doctor and having a nervous breakdown. And Frank Hackett, which is again a funny name, Kilgore, and then Hackett, he's a hack who's
Yeah.
the big exec. But he's going to keep him on no matter what because they got a hit show on their hands. And he's yelling at Schumacher about how happy he is about this, but it almost sounds like it's entirely a lecture. Like this guy's happiness is just bellowing, and then yet at the very end, after Diana, the Faye Dunaway character who he hands over the news division, she's the head of entertainment. He takes the news division away from Holden's Max Schumacher and gives it to her, and they've been having an affair. And then they kind of break up in a stunning way, even though it's not exactly said in that same scene, because Max Schumacher tells Diana to go to hell. And he's back on the phone bellowing about how great this is and that and stuff. And then he kind of quietly turns to Diana and goes like, something going on between you and Schumacher? And she goes, not anymore. But I mean, it's just this funny, quiet delivery line. Like he understands the comedy of it too, and when to be quiet. He doesn't yell it out. Just like something going on between you and Schumacher, almost like, an aside. And yet the whole scene before that, he's so happy that he can finally raise his voice because he's got a big hit and it's exciting and it's like Christmas Day for him. It's very funny, and he's very big and makes big very, very compelling.
Yeah. And he was very lucky to kind of like land these roles in these movies that were sort of ahead of their time. Like if
Mm,
you look at Network, that
yeah,
movie is like you could watch it any year and you could be like, oh, it's relevant today because it's about sensationalized news. It's
right,
about how people are exploited when they're at their worst possible mental state because it's not education, it's entertainment. Although
right.
it's supposed to be an informative box in some ways, it's really at the end of the day an entertainment box. And
Well, you're right.
yeah, yeah,
He picked
Duvall's
good material.
character,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
yeah. Oh no, like Duvall's character, like he was the producer who wanted more, but yeah, he was more of kind of like the straight character. He was because you have like all these zany protagonists in this movie. You have Howard Beale, who's just completely losing his shit on the air, and they're completely exploiting that. You have Faye Dunaway, who's the protagonist of the movie, and she's the opportunistic
Antagonist, I would
producer.
say.
Yeah, and yeah,
I think
she's
it's
the
worse.
opportunistic
Yeah,
antagonist in it,
yeah.
you know?
And
But
the other thing too is to your point, you've got these other characters that are all very, very big and kind of
yeah.
like Max Schumacher, but William Holden and Frank Hackett are reasonably grounded. Where Mr. Arthur Jensen, the boss, who's played by Ned Beatty, and who gets that one big scene where he yells at Howard Beale about you've meddled with the forces of nature, and there
Yeah.
are no countries, there are no nations, there is only AT&T, Union Carbide, and Dow Chemical, and all
Mhm.
that stuff. And even Beatrice Straight, famously in her 4-minute Academy Award-winning Best Supporting Actress performance, she's immediately shown after Max tells her that he's been having an affair with Diana Christensen, and she's all on edge, So
Mhm.
everybody's on edge and big and stuff. And other than that big scene where Frank is bellicose because he's excited and it's like Christmas Day and he's a kid who's yelling from the rafters that he got the greatest gift in the world. Um, he's generally quiet in most of it after that, including kind of low key. And really after that scene, most of the scenes that Duvall has as Frank Hackett are like trying to figure out what are we going to do with the issues that Howard Beale's show and out there character is having them have to deal with, including the fact at the end that the Howard Beale reviews a bunch of network secrets that he's not supposed to, and Frank Hackett sits down with the sort of the head muckety mucks, the C-suite folks, including Diana Christensen, and asks about what they can do about it. And
Mm.
I hope I'm not giving anything away for your younger listeners, but they
S
should have seen this movie by now. But
no,
they
man.
basically are talking about whether or not they should have this man killed. I
Yeah.
also think, to your point, he picked good material because not only were they smart, intellectually, rich stories with vivid, good characters to play and everything else, but he took that supporting role in The Godfather when he was starting to get some leading roles, and He took that supporting role in Network after he became big and Oscar nominated in The Godfather. Just 2 years after that, he was in Network. And, he's kind of playing a villain in it, and it's the supporting part, but it's a great part, and he's great in it. And, he made it so rich and memorable. And to your point about sort of things before their time, I remember when Morton Downey Jr. show came out, and then Bill O'Reilly on The O'Reilly Factor. Those are versions of Howard Beale. This was Paddy Chayefsky, the screenwriter's vision, becoming reality. It was no longer a satire. It had become de facto what these kind of news shows were, because Morton Downey Jr., even though he was a syndicated show, and it was more like Jerry Springer in its way, but it was about hot topic issues and, done with this ranting sort of madman at the center of it, very much like Howard Beale. And then, even O'Reilly, when he would rant, that's what made him so famous, was he would get mad at guests and rant at them and go on and be sort of bellowing and stuff. And that was very much like Network 2. So it was very predictive. And Duvall was smart enough to pick material that, a lot of other people might have shied away from because it might have been too scary or seemingly too edgy.
Yeah, he wasn't afraid to look bad, but he never really played a character who was like straight up evil bad. They were usually just kind of morally in between. One of the lesser known films that he's in that I think I brought up to you like right away when he died and people wouldn't think of it was THX 1138.
Right.
Because there's another movie that, I mean, this was by happenstance he got this role because he worked with Francis Ford Coppola on like one of his first movies, before The Godfather, and then he referenced Duvall to
George
Lucas. Yep. And
Yeah,
then
they were all contemporaries and friends. I mean, Spielberg, Bill Friedkin, Peter Bogdanovich, Brian De Palma, all these sort of enfant terribles, these young up and coming Hollywood filmmakers, and they were all sort of similar tribe or similar friends and everything else. So yeah, that's right. But go ahead. Sorry.
no, you're good. That movie was fascinating because that was another role where he barely says anything in the movie, and there's been a lot of criticism when I read the reviews of THX that, nobody's showing any emotion in the film, and I'm like, well, the whole point of the movie is that these people are not supposed to show emotion.
Right.
They're
The society is controlled by robots. Right.
Yeah, they're controlled by robots. They're constantly medicated. I think it's implied in the movie that we know they're not reproducing because sex is illegal, and people are grown in like little birth pods, like when you see LUH's birth pod for her baby. And if you think about it, THX and LUH, sex and love that are in the movie, which is kind of hidden underneath it. But yeah, this is another role where Duvall, he's not saying a lot, and he's not even supposed to emote a lot, but he's kind of interesting to watch, I think, because of the world that's around him. Maybe a little more than his performance, but it's one of those performances where they don't want you to act too much. And he kind of does a great job of playing someone who's kind of coming off of these meds or wondering what's going on around him, but he never has that I want to rebel moment. He never says it. He just kind of runs away. While the woman who played LUH by him does a fantastic job acting because she's really showing a lot of emotion with those scenes that are shared with him. But that was a movie that I think when Lucas and Murch, because Walter Murch played a huge role in the sound department in it, he said like it was supposed to be about, it was a movie from the future rather than about the future, and it kind of feels that way because everything from the way everything is framed, to the way everything sounds, to the way it's structured, it doesn't feel like anything else that's out there. And stylistically, it's an amazing science fiction film and an amazing movie. Although I will say there are some big flaws, which is the middle act where they're like in the big white prison goes on forever. But aside from that, like it's one of those Robert Duvall movies that I think people should go and seek out because it's worth checking out.
Yeah, and I think it shows just again to the sort of point of your show tonight is the range, and he could play any kind of role, that kind of thing, which was a very different thing, and certainly he didn't do a lot of science fiction genre, but he did all kinds of things. He played Dr. Watson in the 7% Solution, which was again another sort of reactive performance of his, and he's very good in it and very droll and witty. He doesn't say a lot because, of course, Sherlock Holmes and sort of the big talker in that that sort of world. But he was able to do those kind of things too, and in his reactions in THX 1138, I think added demonstrably to those films. By the way, Walter Murch, who was very critical in helping his career and really sort of the films of the 70s and 80s, I think his last big sort of feat was, I don't know if there's anybody else who's won 2 Oscars in the same year, albeit for different jobs. When he did the sound and the editing for The English Patient, and he won an Oscar for both of those that year. So I mean, it's like, wow, he did the sound and the editing. But that's how talented Walter Murch was. But anyway, back to Duvall. The other thing that I think is fascinating about Duvall too is, he could play, sort of quiet religious people, or he could play, bad guys or tough guys, people who were slightly gangsterish, or as we've just talked about, a number of those kind of roles, or different genres too, like westerns. I mean, he started out, one of his big roles when he was a younger man and just in movies was True Grit. He played the villain in that, who basically taunts John Wayne to the shootout at the end. He goes like, I say that's a lot of talk for a one-eyed fat man. That's big talk from a one-eyed fat man. Then he went on to do miniseries like Lonesome Dove, which was kind of a big deal because there weren't a lot of movie actors who were doing those television in those days, but it was a big hit, and he'd done other westerns and different things like that. And of course, he did many roles like sort of military-esque things, probably the most famous being The Great Santini, which a lot of people thought he should have won the Oscar for, but I believe that was the year of Raging Bull, which I guess nobody was really going to beat De Niro that year. But he's given great performances and, and continued to do so. But in some respects, he almost became known for westerns in a way towards the end of his career. He did a lot of those, Open Range with Kevin Costner again, and some of those kind of things. But he's so versatile. And, if you think about how many actors could do sci-fi, genre, gangster movies, he even played Julia Roberts' father, I think, in Something to Talk About, that rom-com. And so, he's doing different things like that, which was, I always would love to have thought what was going on in his head, because I think he just responded to good scripts, or scripts that had good parts or good stories that he responded to. And if he hadn't done before, so what? He would do it. And, the man who could play a network executive, and you'd see him in the tuxedo up at the shareholders meetings and talking about the upcoming slate of shows, could turn a ride around and become, a quiet priest in True Confessions, or, a military man who can't stand losing a basketball game of one-on-one with his son, and bounces the ball off his head to taunt him. It's just, I remember people hated Duvall for that. And he talked about it. He goes like, well, but he's a very sympathetic character for many reasons. He's flawed. It's like true. And that's a great thing about Duvall too. Even at his worst, his character's worst, you can still see the humanity and the pain inside this actor, the pain inside this character that the actor imbued him with.
Yeah, that's what a good actor should do with a character, is that you don't judge them. No matter who you're playing, you have to understand why this person is the way they are. If you're just straight up judging them or playing them one-dimensionally, it often doesn't work. I know Al Pacino has famously been sort of regretful for how he played Tony Montana, although I think that performance is fantastic. But
well, it's funnier. It plays more as a comedy the more you watch it, doesn't it?
Yeah, that movie's straight up comedy.
It was such an edgy drama, very violent, and all that. And now you watch it, it almost seems funny, because he's so over the top in it, and all the lines and the outrageousness of it. But
when they're playing Push It to the Limit and they're like zooming in on him and he's like laughing and talking on the phone, it looks cartoony, and yeah, I mean that's one of those, it's kind of bloated, that movie, but also it feels like a large epic saga, and yeah, somehow that worked out. But I could go in a
well, one of the things I liked about Duvall's career too is that I think he played his age as he got older too, and he wasn't afraid of doing that. I mean, he obviously went through it's the sort of younger man stage, or sometimes the leading man stuff. But he was like, the patriarch in Rambling Rose with Laura Dern, and
Mhm.
he was played outside of his kind of comfort zone. He played Hispanic barber in
Mm.
Wrestling Room with Henry, which was kind of a two-hander with Richard Harris at the time. He was, in supporting roles in things like Phenomenon and Sling Blade, but one of his great later roles
Mm.
too was, he was in the paper. He was the editor of the
Yeah,
New York newspaper, and that's a very underrated movie. It's a Ron
it
Howard
is,
film
yeah.
from '94, and he has so many great scenes, and including the one where he tells Glenn Close, as one of the star reporters who's chasing all the gossip and stuff, like, you're never going to make the money in this business. If you want to make a lot of money, you've got to go into other professions, but it's just not in journalism. And she was always wanting more money, and she lived high off the hog beyond her means and stuff, and he had to give her these kind of sense of reality. But he'd also turn around and do comedies. I mean,
Mhm.
Robert Duvall was a soccer coach fighting with Mike Ditka and kicking and screaming. I mean, the fact that he's in that kind of stuff, or he was the guy who helped Jack Reacher, Tom Cruise, in the movies that they did for there. With sort of the late sort of scenes where they get revenge. I also always famously said, Duvall was such a good actor on television. He did a lot of TV in the time too, just where the good roles were. He could not only play a very believable Dwight D. Eisenhower, but turn around and also play Joseph
Mhm.
Stalin. He could
Mhm.
be the hero and the villain, and his truth, and find the essence of the role, and being these strong, big, or not so big but important characters, was just part of his part and parcel.
Yeah. And one role of his that always really kind of stood out to me in a movie that I think is really overlooked is his performance as the old man in The Road, where
Mhm.
he talks about his son and a time that
Right.
once has been. And take a look at the final note in this clip. It's kind of eerie and sad and sort of reflects how I feel sometimes these days.
When I saw that boy, I thought I'd died, and he was an angel. I had a boy one time of my own.
Did you ever wish you would die?
No, it's foolish to ask for luxuries in times like these.
Yeah. That's a movie where whenever
Yeah.
people go, "What do you think the future is gonna be like?" I'm like, "Well, there's a scene in The Road where, Viggo Mortensen's showing a revolver to his son, and there's
Yeah.
2 bullets in there, and he goes, "Well, one for you and one for me. You know what to do." Just, and I think that role is great, not only because he was the funniest thing is that movie came out a while ago, and he played an old man
Yeah,
in
that's
that,
right.
you know?
And he's
And
played his age along the lines. I mean, he's
Mhm.
he's played the older patriarch and things, and I mean, one of his last great roles was, he was in The Judge alongside
Mm.
Robert Downey Jr., and he won some awards for that. He was also in a civil action going up against John Travolta, which had a very good cast, and he was strong in that. I mean, he's been in good films, and I think it's interesting that they reach out to him, even if it's a small role like that in The Road. But it's a very critical role, and he's very good in it. He's very memorable in it, and he's worked with different kinds of people, and I just he's been on the stage too. We forget that he did theater work in the '70s and
Mm.
'80s, and as well as television before it was sort of popular to do that. Um, and worked alongside great directors and great actors, and you know just I think was interested in being a good actor and
Mhm.
doing the work. And again, for him, I don't think it was as important whether he was above the title. Now, the one time was he didn't do The Godfather 3 because they weren't offering him proper money, and they were originally in the original script he had a bigger role, but when he refused to it,
It's
they
'cause he wasn't gonna be, paid as
as
he
much
didn't
as he
want
should have been.
Pacino
Yeah,
to get paid 4 times
right,
as much or something.
right.
Yeah.
But then then they kind of shrunk their role back, and George, oh gosh, when am I blanking on his name for a second here? The actor who was in Love at First Sight. Why am I forgetting what his name is? Anyway, he played the role, and it was mostly window dressing. He didn't have a lot to do in
Yeah.
it, but yeah, Duvall has mostly been just going to where there's good work to be done, whether it was the stage with American Buffalo or television with things like he did for Lonesome Dove and the miniseries for Ike and Stalin, or later life, taking roles that probably weren't that challenging, but they were fun, and he got to work with good people, and could do some of these things. I mean, we forget he was Frank Burns in MASH.
Yeah.
Long before Larry Linville made it his own on television, which is a great character and stuff. But George Hamilton, that's who it was. But I mean, he was, he was, the two-faced guy who was having the affair with Hot Lips Houlihan, and that was hilarious. And and then also, he was great in things like The Apostle, which I think, was
He wrote and directed that too.
he wrote and directed that
Yeah.
too, and that was very strong character study. And so the man was just talented, and he was always a good interview, and he did all kinds of things. But I mean, he really was an actor's actor. I mean, and to your point about 2026 already being sort of a suck year, we have had, it'll be funny to see what the in memoriam stuff looks like at the Screen Actors Guild Award, let alone the Academy Awards. And I think BAFTA coming up too will have it, because this year we lost some really key people from that era with, Duvall and Redford and Diane Keaton and a number of others that, were big losses in many respects. So it's been a year of. Gene Hackman, I think, died this year, did he not? Or
last year.
Last year, but I mean, I don't think did they have him in the Oscars? I forget. But anyway,
sure
nonetheless,
yeah.
there are some big losses of the seminal stars and most important actors of the 60s and 70s, and now Duvall is gone as well.
It's just kind of like a reminder of, oh wow, everyone that I grew up watching are getting old and they're dying, and it's just I don't mean to end on that kind of sad note, but you kind of see these actors from this era going away. Like, look at how old Al Pacino is now, and Jack Nicholson.
Yeah, exactly.
Robert
They're
De
going to be
Niro.
next. I mean, they're old men now, and you're not going to see a lot of people with careers like that anymore that are going to be that long and that prolific and dare I say, important careers. That I mean, Duvall was one of those actors who people studied and wanted to be like, and he was one of the great icons and sort of heroes to many actors of not only his generation but a number of generations behind that. Same with some of the other people that have been lost. We've got a few of those people who have a lasting quality, and Denzel and Leo. I mean, those are two just that are doing great work and have done great work since their early 20s and into their probably 40s and 50s now. I think Denzel's even in his 60s, but there's not a lot of them anymore. And the 70s produced a lot of them, and Pacino and De Niro. I mean, when they're gone, you've lost really. And the other thing that was key about Hackman, and I made a mention of this in the little obituary I wrote, which I do on social media, not to make a full extensive article about it, though occasionally I've done that, but just kind of an extended paragraph is, I think one of the great regrets that I have as a film fan, let alone a film critic and somebody who makes a certain part of his life into sort of sharing these thoughts with an audience, is Robert Duvall was one of the key actors who, like Gene Hackman, was a character actor who was also a leading man. And yes, he did supporting roles and smaller roles, but he also did lead roles. And Michael Caine was sort of the same way on the British side. And there's a few of those people on that side too. And shame on the American Film Institute, as great as that venerable institution is and has done marvelous work for preserving film and making us understand the importance of scholarships and the new generation of filmmakers and everything like that. They did not give Gene Hackman, Robert Duvall, or Michael Caine their American Film Institute Life Achievement Award. And those are three candidates that definitely should have gotten it. And it's like, well, they weren't as pivotal and important as like bullshit. They were very important and pivotal. And, they gave it to Nicholson, they gave it to De Niro, they gave it to Hoffman. Good for them. They've given it to mostly great choices, but along the way, they should have made sure, and they had plenty of time. Duvall could have gotten this 5 years ago and he would have shown up for the dinner, I'm sure. Or if he didn't want to go to sit for the dinner, then convince him to sit for the dinner, AFI. I mean, there's lots of people who've turned it down because they didn't want to sit for the dinner. Well, then do a better job of convincing them. Paul Newman turned it down. Woody Allen's turned it down. Albert Finney, a number of other people over the years. Katharine Hepburn famously turned it down, I think, 3 or 4 times. In fact, I think she was like one of the first 2 or 3 they tried to give it to because she's still alive and making movies then. But she didn't want to sit. She's never come to the Oscars. The only time she ever went to the Oscars was to present an award. She never went when she was nominated, even though she won 4 times in competition. But anyway, it's just it shows you that even the venerable institutions like the AFI didn't quite understand and get Duvall probably, or Hackman, and maybe Kane, who could still get it, though he's probably not going to at this point. They didn't get their contributions to cinema entirely, and they got it wrong, and they should have given Duvall the award. And they can say, well, he's not going to get the people there to show up in the audience for the television show. It doesn't matter. He had a great career. I mean, I think, just as the offbeat leading man became a big deal in the 70s with the likes of George Segal and Elliot Gould and Richard Benjamin and Dustin Hoffman and Al Pacino, people who were ethnic or not typically handsome, sort of the typical leading man type, became leading men and fronted many, many movies and had great careers. Also the emergence, I think, from the 60s and 70s were the character actors who became leading men and big stars. Hackman, Duvall, to some degree, people like Michael Caine, who, I mean, still a leading man and stuff, but could do more character-y work, which were outside of the typical actors. But especially Duvall and Hackman, I think they were groundbreaking in the sense that these people who were everyday Joes became major movie stars. And everybody, if you showed the picture of any of the pictures that you've got in your panel here of Duvall to even people of your generation, or maybe even a decade younger, most of them would probably know who that is because they've seen him around in something, especially if they're film fans. They would recognize him from Apocalypse Now and The Godfather and things like that. But I think, he's appreciated and beloved and vaulted, and yet maybe not still vaulted enough.
Yeah, but you get the thing is, because he wasn't the classic good-looking actor, but he was part of the new Hollywood era, which is the best era of filmmaking for for America, at least. Because we kind of saw what was going on in France, where they were sort of changing their language with cinema, and we liked what Italy was doing with neorealism, and then we went to with America, we decided, well, we wanted to make more subversive, odd movies that explore the gray areas in life, and ironically, George Lucas is the guy who kind of catapulted us forever into
but see, the funny thing too is that's also Hollywood deciding that that's the one they wanted to go with because they wanted everything to be such a blockbuster. But if you look at Star Wars, it was an homage to old sort of serials and westerns.
Buck Rogers, just like the beginning of THX, where they showed Buck
that's
Rogers,
exactly right. Just as I think Raiders of the Lost Ark was an homage to the films that Lucas and Spielberg grew up on, and I don't think we should hold those against them. Along the way,
no.
They've done some great stuff too. But I mean, to your point, Duvall was one of those representatives of the American cinema of the 60s in the same way that Nicholson and Hoffman and Pacino and and even Robert Redford and Paul Newman were anti-heroes. They were not playing typical likable people that were the white hats right in. Quite the contrary. I would argue that both Newman and Redford, and certainly Brando, made their reputation sort of playing the kind of anti-hero that they weren't really. I think Clint Eastwood played more outright good guys in some respects, but Eastwood too, he's another one who, handsome, strapping 6'2" guy, looks great but he did very few romances and very few movies where he was in a leading man position. In fact, I think he was doing character work, and most of these people were always doing character work, albeit in leading man's bodies. And I think that's probably true of Leo and Brad Pitt and a few other young actors or youngish actors, not today and stuff like that. But Duvall cannot be, and I think this week just drove home about like, oh my God, look at all those movies he did. Even when you think about he was in The Conversation, and he was a very critical role in The Conversation. It's a small role, but it's the whole center of what were they saying about him? That's the entire movie, Or I love the fact too that he was not above, or beneath rather, I guess, or whatever you want to say it, above or beneath, of doing a cameo. Like he's the priest on the swing in Philip Kaufman's The
Yeah.
Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which is like, that's just odd. Like everything is topsy turvy in this new world. Now, whether that's a priest who's trying to still have some fun, or that's alien who saw, these kids playing and thought, I'm going to try that out, even though I've taken over this, Jesuit's body. It's just a wonderful little cameo, and he did stuff like that and was willing and generous to do that for filmmakers in different things. He turns around and does Days of Thunder with Tom Cruise. Now, granted, it's probably a big payday, and he knew it was going to be a hit because Cruise was the hottest thing there. But he's good in it. He's good as the crusty old guy, and he plays it well, and he has a couple of good scenes in it. And I honestly don't know if Robert Duvall ever gave a bad performance. In fact, the one thing you could probably say about Duvall is I don't know if you could ever really catch him acting, even when he was playing playing Joseph Stalin underneath the wig and a big mustache and playing this terrible figure. He managed to find the reality in that characterization and put it on film or in television, as this case. Maybe.
Yeah, he was a very subtle actor where he didn't overact, he
Right.
just kind of delivered what was on the script, but he also wasn't boring. It's kind of that certain mixture where you don't get that with most actors, where they know how to show the subtlety of the scene, but they also don't bore you to tears.
Right.
Because there's a lot of actors who can underact or overact, but not
Right.
they can't Goldilocks that shit and just find it just right. And he luckily can do that.
And to your point that Walter Murch said, a lot of screen acting is in the eyes. It's in reacting. I mean, when Robert Redford died, they talked about his film career too, and it's very similar to Duvall's in a way that I think his main acting roles are generally reacting to whatever the situation is, as much with his face. I mean, could Duvall be a talker? Certainly. I mean, The Apostle and Network and some of those scenes are filled with great soliloquies or dialogue. And, his speech in Apocalypse Now is used as an audition piece by many actors trying to get into the actor's studio and such. But, it's a lot of times the reactions, the THX 1138, the Boo Radley, the reacting to somebody, even when he's in Network after that big speech, he's mostly just like, so what are we going to do about the Beale problem? I'm open to ideas. And you see him then listening to the 5 other people who offer ideas in that room, and how it's processing across his face. That's a sign of a great actor, when he can hold your attention by just being reactive and not being the center of attention, not being the spotlight shining on him necessarily, with the easy cues, being the star, being given great dialogue and stuff like that. It's a sign of a great actor, and Duvall did that as well as any actor ever who's been on film, I think.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna miss him very much, and I'm just waiting just for the day now where they're gonna say Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, anyone from the rest of the Godfather gang will die away.
I know.
But
Diane Keaton was a biggie. I mean, what a
yeah,
great actress she was. She was like Duvall. She could do comedy, drama. She could play zany. She could play incredibly fiercely intelligent. It's like, wow, she had the range too. And she got the AFI. They didn't give Duvall the AFI, but at least they gave her it. Robert
yeah,
Redford turned it down too, by the way, apparently. That's the
yeah,
vote. But anyway.
yeah. But I
Not
know,
the
and I
AFI's the
can't.
end all be all. It's the
I
last
still
big award, and they should have given it to Duvall.
I still can't believe that on the 4K that we got for All the President's Men, they didn't put in Robert Redford's audio commentary.
And
It's
considering
like
he was
the guy just died and they
the
didn't put
driving
it.
force behind that project, and
Yeah,
why would they not suddenly say, we got to put this on there? He just died. It's going to make it all the more saleable. I mean, they're not even thinking about commerce because they're not thinking at all,
yeah,
And why
yeah.
would you not do that? You've got more than enough disc time to do that. If you're even selling discs anymore, who buys discs anymore except for film
People
critics and
should
people like
be.
you, Mike? Well, they could, because they may disappear and then you don't know whether they're ever going to be on streaming or whatever. But
Yeah.
put it on there. Give these people their due. But Robert Duvall got a lot of due, but I don't know if he got as much due as Duvall should have, because I think he was really incredible.
Yeah, yeah. It's sad how they're all going away, but I'm also very grateful for the legacy that they left. And
That's for sure. The
yeah,
films
yeah,
live on, and we get to see them. It's preserved, and you've got how many decades of great Duvall performances to go back and watch again and marvel at his range and just his
yeah.
incredible impact.
Yeah, I almost had the chance to meet him. He was possibly on the list for a film festival that I was help it out with, but fortunately it didn't work out. But
Well, you've
that's
met
it.
him on screen other ways, so
Many,
that's
many
all good.
ways. Many,
Yes.
many ways.
Well, Mike, maybe
Defense.
that's your new thing. Yeah, there you go. Exactly. He's been falling down. And see there, there's the I think it was People Magazine. I'm not sure if they were quoting Coppola, but I think
Yeah.
it was People Magazine that actually said he was Hollywood's number one, number two. But there again, he's not in the lead role, but he's critical to the success of that movie, and he's
Yeah.
really good in it. And he never condescends to the rather obviousness of the material and sort of the pulp of it. But he's committed to that, and he's finding the truth in it, even if it's a little bit broad in places and over the top. But still, Duvall made it seem real.
Yeah, there was a toughness and a sweetness to him, He
Yep.
was tough, but not like macho kind of guy tough, but more just like male, like
Yeah.
testosterone.
He had
Not
a
just
male
yeah,
presence, like he was a
yeah,
man.
male president.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's hard to see him ever as a teenager. I'm sure he was, but he was always a very solid male, whether as a young man or an older man. He brought a lot of sort of the best of masculine qualities to him. I mean, occasionally played overly macho, like in his military roles. Of course, those are apt to be
Yeah.
that way. But you're right. He had a great masculine presence without any real strutting or I don't think of him as ever taking his shirt off to show how buff he was and so in fact, quite the contrary. Even when he takes his shirt off in Apocalypse Now, he's kind of small. I mean, he's
Yeah.
not a big man, and he's kind of small physique wise, and he was very fit in that role. But you don't think of him as Clint Eastwood, who when they took off the shirt in Begala, it's like, wow, there's a strapping 6'2" man.
Yeah.
All the women lusting after him.
Or with Ben-Hur with Charlton
Oh,
Heston. Oh
Charlton
my
Heston.
God.
Truly, I mean, he was naked in half of his films. I mean,
Who
well
could
into his
blame
late
him?
40s, like Planet of the Apes. I mean, God damn it, Heston, you look damn good running around. It couldn't have been easy running around in that weather, and everybody else is. Of course, he probably said, like, at least I didn't wear the ape makeup. But
Yeah.
still, yeah. But Duvall he was really a man's man in many respects and had this masculine, mature authority to him.
Yeah, exactly. He was masculine, but he wasn't an idiot. He wasn't because you get a lot of these masculine dumb guys who gravitate towards Trump. And I mean, Robert Duvall, he was conservative, but he did say in 2014 that he thinks the Republican Party is a mess and considered himself an independent. So
Right.
he's cool, because he has a heart. He can see crazy shit and be like, that's heartless,
Well, he did a lot of, I would dare say, liberal material in his early days. I mean, The Godfather isn't exactly, a ringing endorsement of, crime. It's quite the opposite. Even though you sympathize for those characters, like they tend to lose. I mean, Michael wins everything, and there's no takers and no competition by the end of Godfather 2, and yet he's alone, sitting by Lake, the river, the waters in Lake Tahoe, and his family's gone, and he killed his brother and drove his wife away. What does he have to show for it? And then the end scene of Godfather 2 is, of course, him driving everybody else away too there, including Tom, who's like, Tom says, Michael, your father has great plans for you. He didn't want you to join the army and all this. And Michael's, you can see the prick that he would become. He's like, you and my father have talked about my career. You've talked about my career. Like, Tom's trying to be helpful and kind, and, he's just dismissive of him. And then Michael sits alone at the end. But yeah, Duvall was, so good in that one scene. It was just the end scene of Godfather 2. He's so good.
Yeah. Will be sorely missed, but thank God for his legacy, and thank God for you coming on the show. So we always have something to talk
Thank
about.
you, Mike. You're always fun to guest. It's always fun to guest on your show and talk with you.
If you want to check out Jeff York's stuff, go to theestablishingshot.com. You can find
.org.
.org. It is a .org.
Yes,
okay.
Yeah. Somebody else had it
organization.
years ago. It's like, how dare they? But yeah, it's .org.
Yeah, well, luckily there is a link in here.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, whoever created copy and paste is a genius. But yes, go to theestablishingshot.org, where Jeff has many caricatures of your favorite movie characters. He also has his 1-minute TikTok reviews. And if you liked what you saw here, you can go to ypareviews.com and find me at YPA Reviews. If you use the Google machine, you'll find me on Instagram, TikTok, all that stuff. Anyways, until then, thank you so much for watching, and check out some good movies and stay warm. And we